All right, it's a pleasure to be here virtually. I'm recording from my bathroom, just like Weird Al did with his first big hit, kind of. And I had some helpful tips from the Society for American Music Conference guidelines, which advised in dress, avoid busy stripes and prints, but they surely didn't have a paper on Weird Al in mind, so here I am. All right. Though he dismissed popular music as a mass drug of distraction, even Theodore Adorno found a special connection between youth and popular culture. But this alignment does very little to explain the career of Weird Al Yankovic, who turned 60 last October with over 4 decades of music making and a multi-generational fan base, those of any age who dare to be stupid. Based on newspaper headlines from throughout his long career, this longevity wasn't supposed to happen. Over the years, papers have emphasized his enduring success, revealing a certain surprise in his ongoing popularity, as well as the substance of his popularity, with consistent use of the adverb still. He's still going, still making music. One headline from May 3rd, 2000 in the Evansville Courier and Press got at the issue more directly. Quote, "Al's still weird despite his age," end quote. Pop musicians supposedly age out of culture, but apparently Yankovic was expected to grow up and grow out of his particular brand of comedic music as well. To be fair, Yankovic hasn't always helped change the narrative. In the article, Weird Al Still Waiting to Be Adult, from the Chatham Daily News of October 6, 1999, Yankovic claimed, quote, "I thought by now I'd be an adult and have a real job," end quote. But Yankovic also seems to be working against an expectation of aging, the idea that we become more serious over time. In her 2013 Atlantic article, How Happiness Changes with Age, Heidi Halvorson offered some foundation for the assumption. "We all grow up," she wrote, "and for many of us, what it means to be happy slowly evolves into something completely different," end quote. She continued, quote, "Happiness becomes less the high energy, totally psyched experience of a teenager partying while his parents are out of town, and more the peaceful, relaxing experience of an overworked mom who's been dreaming of that hot bath all day," end quote. According to one study, this transformation reaches its apex, or peak boring, around 39 for men and even earlier 35 for women. Our silliness is then sedate. Yankovic was supposed to follow the pattern, opting for tea over glee. I mentioned this supposed natural progression when I interviewed him one hot day in July at his sleek modern home in the Hollywood Hills for the newly released book, Weird Al Seriously. And Yankovic revealed to me, quote, "I'm still more of a shower person than a bath person, though I do a bath every now and then," end quote. So there's hope, I suppose. But it isn't just comedy confounding norms of aging. Based in part on interviews with Yankovic, this paper addresses the varied ways Yankovic's music, his parody and approach to parody, both confirm and undermine the common perception of youth as central to popular music. Just as Yankovic confounds expectations around aging and the passing of time, so too do his songs, in part through the intertextual possibilities of parody. Dan Laffey defines youth in his book, Music and Youth Culture, as people somewhere between immature children and fully fledged adults. Yankovic's musical appeal then starts pre-youth, as children discover his music, grow up, and then bring their own children to his shows, and so on. The genre of parody, something old combined with something new, supports the cycle. In musical parody, a new work incorporates an older work, repurposing the text, the music, or the general style, the process, a perennial favorite on the playground. As English professor Robert Chambers notes, children love to mimic, but their play often breaks with the copy, creating, quote, "a sudden upending of whatever natural order is present," end quote. In her study of the music of children, Patricia Campbell, who works in both music education and ethnomusicology, confirms the centrality of parody for kids. One of the ways kids safely release existing tensions while asserting themselves as individuals. But Yankovic has also catered to children more directly. He participated in the adaptation of classical music for children, Sergei Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, and Camille Saint-Saëns' The Carnival of Animals, complete with accordion and, quote, "a very bad British accent," end quote. His Weird Al show also ran for one season in 1997 on CBS. In addition to his ongoing voiceover work and musical contributions to animated hits like Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, he has also written 2 books for children, When I Grow Up, 2011, and My New Teacher and Me, 2013. Once in transition from childhood to adulthood, Yankovic's music for some is a point of entry into popular culture as a whole. This was true for fan Austin Roloffs, who experienced Weird Al as a gateway to Nirvana. He told me, quote, "Al took me from the Beatles to Nirvana when I was ready," end quote. In this way, as Nathan Rabin writes in his book, Weird Al the Book, quote, "Buying a Weird Al album has been a rite of passage for young people since the 80s, end quote. To some, this connection between Yankovic and kids becoming youth is a point of dismissal, augmenting the existing hierarchy of serious versus humorous music. In The Complete Al, a faux celebrity documentary created in 1985 in collaboration with film producer Robert K. Weiss of the Naked Gun franchise, a pseudo-producer admits he doesn't like Yankovic's music, but his kids sure do. In the article Weirdly Popular, the New Yorker's Sasha Frere Jones applauds Yankovic's music as reassuring while insulting it as, quote, kid stuff. Quote, "Though I eventually left behind what felt like kid stuff is another way of describing a thing that we know, that feels familiar and unthreatening," end quote. This rejection has foundation in our cultural attitudes toward the music of children, which has been generally overlooked or ignored as primitive cultural expression. As Campbell writes, quote, "Children were once thought to be waiting to become something more than themselves, and the thought of them as members of a children's culture was inconceivable for centuries," end quote. Despite this attitude, Yankovic's initially young fan base has been part of his unusual recipe for multi-generational appeal and enduring success, early interest in parody, a gateway to popular culture, and later a nostalgic touchstone. But Yankovic has remained relevant in the lives of many young people by powerfully plugging into a specific youth identity, the outsider or nerd, itself an identity in transition. Though Yankovic's song White and Nerdy from 2006, a parody of Chamillionaire's Ride-In, is perhaps the most iconic example, Yankovic throughout his career has created a safe space for those perceived different or fatally uncool with unfashionable clothes and interests. Already in 1979, he had written the never-released song Born to Be Mild, a parody of Born to Be Wild. And in 1996, he wrote another never-released gem, Gee, I'm a Nerd, a parody of the Beatles' Free as a Bird, which both defines a nerd and lays out his plight. He's hooked on Star Trek and the internet, but, quote, "all the jokes and muscle heads split me the bird, 'cause I'm a nerd," end quote. These songs, as well as his 1999 song, It's All About the Pentiums, a play on Sean Puff Daddy Combs' It's All About the Benjamins, are part of the same continuum as White and Nerdy, a celebration of the youthful nerd who somewhere along the way became cool along with Weird Al. As in the 2004 film Napoleon Dynamite, the nerd was someone incapable of conforming, a different sort of expected youthful rebellion. By 2011, linguist Mary Buchholz, who studied nerdiness in high school students, recognized the nerd as a significant youth identity and for some, a proud self-identity. Yankovic's ownership of his own nerd status in song has been a significant means of self-empowerment for fans, whether they were part of the change in meaning around nerd or not. Weird Al has made it okay to be different during youth, a time when there is significant pressure to fit in. And for any outsider, Yankovic's 1985 song, Dare to Be Stupid, an ode to Devo, summed up the potential pride in difference. In the world of Weird Al Yankovic, a huge online forum for fans, Dare to Be Stupid was voted the best song on the album of the same name 3 times over. In Doug Gross's 2010 list of the top 10 geek anthems, Dare to Be Stupid comes in at number 10. Gross admits, quote, White and Nerdy or All About the Pentiums would have also been obvious choices here from an artist with probably as loyal a geek following as anyone. But Dare to Be Stupid was a mission statement at a time when Al was still ascending to super nerd status, end quote. One writer, Mark Silverberg, claimed the song was Yankovic's own guiding mantra, a song that, quote, brilliantly sums up his philosophy on life and music, end quote. But Yankovic himself seems reluctant to assign the song deeper personal meaning. By phone, he told me that the phrase was one of those odd things that popped in my head, end quote. He had written Dare to be Stupid in a notebook, and one day he came back to the line and thought, quote, that's a song. When I pushed for meaning, he added, I guess if anybody is taking it seriously, it's saying that it's okay to be different, dare to think outside the box, to do things that other people may not agree with or accept. You've got to follow your own drummer. With this powerful message, Weird Al has had special relevance for some young people as they find and embrace their own unique self-identities. His approach to his art and the properties of parody have reinforced that relevance. Yankovic has always been a student, as he says, of the zeitgeist, as he chooses music and musicians to parody. He consistently parodies the latest hits, aware that his popularity depends in part on the popularity of his targets. As he explained to Dan Rather in his 2015 Big interview, part of his job is keeping his, quote, finger on the pulse, end quote, staying abreast of new cultural fads and fashions. That job has become more difficult as culture has become more segmented. In an ear-to-ear interview with Roy Zimmerman in 2010, Yankovic recalled how he originally responded to a seemingly common culture, often reflected in the Billboard Top 10 or on MTV. But culture since has splintered. To gauge popularity, he has had to evolve, following various genres and various platforms simultaneously. With that changing approach, he has often been tied to the next big thing in pop culture, as in 1992 when he took on the cultural craze that was Nirvana. Grunge music had just taken over American music with the release of Nirvana's 1991 Nevermind, and with Yankovic's 1992 album Off the Deep End and its song Smells Like Nirvana, a takeoff of Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. Weird Al had his biggest score since Eat It of 1984. Parody itself is part of the process. It's blending of old and new, but more literally young stars and an increasingly older Yankovic. In Performing Rights, Simon Frith recognizes three potential persona embodied in a popular singer: the real person, the performance persona, and the character the singer plays. For Yankovic, there are still more, as his performance involves the persona of the parodied singer. In parodies like Party in the CIA from 2011, here in this picture in live performance, a play on Miley Cyrus's Party in the USA, or his 2014 Handy, a parody of Iggy Azalea's Fancy, Yankovic creates a dialogue between two different ideas in lyric, but also two very different stars. Yankovic told Rabin in a 2011 interview, quote, I decided if I was going to do a parody of a Miley Cyrus song, I had to make it very dark. That had to be part of the joke. I'm taking this kind of pop, bubblegummy fluff of a song and making it very dark and twisted, end quote. But at the same time, through the intertextual potential of parody, the two musicians, Cyrus and Yankovic, merge in some ways. As Chambers explores, in parody there is an ambiguity in the relationship between two texts, the past and the present, inherent in the word's root, the Greek noun parodia. Para has two meanings, counter or against, as well as beside. In parody, two works may be counter, at odds, or simply beside, connected or unified. Arguably, two musicians meld to a certain extent as well. To successfully parody contemporary musical trends for this long, Yankovic has not only adapted to a changing structure of popularity in music, he has also had to bend to the music industry's ever-changing technological norms. Early on, Yankovic realized his direct parodies were best served by the careful replication of the original's music. He explained to me his team's effort in this regard, calling the recreation forensic group work. Quote, well, I'm very fortunate enough to work with very talented people. I've had the same band since the early 80s, and I work with talented engineers. And I've been doing this myself for a while. So we've got a good team in the studio, and we just dissect it. It's like a forensic kind of thing where we really dig deep and we try to figure out everything that the original musicians did in the studio. And sometimes, if we're baffled, sometimes we'll approach the original musicians. I remember my drummer contacted the guy from Imagine Dragons, like, how do you get that effect on the snare drum? End quote. When I asked drummer John Bermuda Schwartz about the process, he called it, quote, an exercise in backwards engineering, one that becomes more challenging with each project as mainstream music and sound evolve and production is cutting edge. He shared, quote, with program songs in particular in the 80s, synth drum sounds were more easily identifiable and somewhat easy to match or get very close. Later, as artists and producers began using computers to modify and create sounds from scratch, it was sometimes impossible to determine what sounds were used, and the band's job became more difficult. My approach changed from what did they do to how would I make that sound. Then again, Yankovic has also found that he isn't always playing catch-up. In some ways, technology has caught up to his needs. For example, he decided to make his 2014 album, Mandatory Fun, his last, eyeing single-song release instead. Waiting for enough songs for an album, hoping the songs remain relevant, seemed to him an unnecessary gamble. In 2015, he said, quote, I feel like for the kind of music that I do, releasing things digitally as soon as I think of them is a bit more efficient in terms of getting my music out, end quote. In all of these ways, with Parody's appeal, Yankovic's adjustments for the music industry and technology, as well as the special intertextuality of Parody, Yankovic has found himself perennially a part of youth identity and popular culture. In so doing, his career has undermined expectations of aging in music, the cliche of youth centrality in pop culture. It's hardly surprising then that Yankovic has taken on the subject of aging and the passing of time as a topic in his parodies, flipping convention in song just as he does by example. On the 1998 album Even Worse, Yankovic highlights the phrase, good old days. In the song aptly titled Good Old Days, a style parody of the music of folk artist James Taylor, Yankovic imitates the quaint comfort associated with Taylor, known for songs like You've Got a Friend in Me, as he describes a simpler time. Quote, Dad would be up at dawn, he'd be watering the lawn, end quote. The accompaniment is light, featuring the acoustic guitar, and the music has an easygoing, wholesome lilt. But while Mom was making, quote, fresh biscuits or hot apple pie, end quote, Yankovic sings, quote, I'd spend all day long in the basement, torturing rats with a hacksaw and pulling the wings off of flies. The music in a major key does not alter or modulate to illustrate these darker activities, uniting baking and torture as if there is some equivalence. At the same time, the consistent sound does make clear the chronology. Both the good and the bad happened in this past. The jarring contrast quickly gives way to the refrain after a silent downbeat, a moment of pause. Quote, those were the good old days, harmonized in happy block progression. Yankovic pits our often glowing picture of the past and nostalgic amnesia against the dark deeds that surely occurred then too. It's a humorous clash with a pointed message, one that plays with a cliched phrase connected to aging. His 1992 song, When I Was Your Age, is another example. A style parody of the music of Don Henley, solo artist and founding member of the Eagles. In the parody, Yankovic riffs on the existing hyperbole and overuse of the titular phrase by stretching its reach even further. Well, nobody ever drove me to school when it was 90 degrees below. We had to walk buck naked through 40 miles of snow. As is typical of many Yankovic's songs, the scenario quickly escalates. Dad would whoop us every night till 12:15, then he'd get too tired and make us whoop ourselves. The chorus, when I was your age, when I was your age. Yankovic thereby offers a twist on the passing of time while doing the same thing in his career as a whole, defying expectations of young versus old in a long and still ongoing musical career. Through parody, Yankovic can appeal to a young audience by responding to new cultural and technological trends, creating an intertextual space merging and mediating various young stars and himself. He defies the perceived norm of popular youth culture by bringing himself into each new musical conversation. Parody is then the combination of the old and new, but also the new that is youth and ow. Yankovic's drummer, Bermuda Schwartz, a part of Yankovic's longtime band, has been working with Yankovic since their first meeting in 1980. With that, he has a joke, quote, that I would be his drummer until he's old Al Yankovic. But for Weird Al, old may be forever confounded by the dialogue and parody, the current cultural craze, the topic of time, and comedy itself. The centrality of youth in culture becomes the centrality of innovation and contemporary relevance. And that doesn't always correspond to age, at least for Yankovic, Weird, and for ever young Al. Thank you.